One, I think everybody that wants to be in this event is now inside. It's the last one of the afternoon. So first of all, congratulations to all of you for your resilience, for being here at the last event of the afternoon. I'm Franz Fries-Gross. I'm the World Bank's Regional Director for Infrastructure in West and Central Africa. So welcome to all of you for this event on resilient infrastructure in urban settings. So give me just a few minutes just to contextualize what we're going to discuss, and then we'll go to our panelists. But I think all of us that work on urban mobility, urban infrastructure, et cetera, and have been coming to TT for a couple of years, we know that TT has always talked about connectivity, about connecting people, keeping cities moving. But I think by now, I think all of us that work on the agenda realize that urban infrastructure and connective infrastructure in particular is no longer just about keeping people moving. It's about keeping economies, essential services, and communities functioning under situations of stress. So when we say situations of stress, what do we mean? Well, rapid urbanization for one thing. Second, increasing climate shocks, including flooding and extreme heat, but also growing demographic pressure, often outpacing what planning, financing, and institutional capacity can deliver. As I said, I'm Infrastructure Director for West and Central Africa. We have cities like in Niger growing at an average of 4% a year. Burkina Faso 3% a year. There's no way planning, even the best of planning, can keep pace with that. And yet, if you don't, you quickly sit on an agglomeration that's just completely unmanageable. And things aren't going to get easier. Let me just say that cities today are home to 45% of the 8.2 billion people on the planet. If we'd been here together in 1950, that number would have been 20. It's now 45%. And if I look forward, not backwards to 1950, but forward to 2050, 2/3 of all population growth between now and 2050 are going to happen in cities, 2/3. And of that 2/3, 90% will be in low and middle income countries. So getting a handle on that, especially in Asia and in Africa, will be a huge challenge. And unfortunately, especially in Africa, for example, most of those big cities, over 1 million, are located in areas that are somehow in hazard-prone areas. So that was the first point, right? It's no longer just about connecting people, moving people, but ensuring the resilience of all of that. The second thing is that all of this is macro-critical, which is important when we talk to finance ministers. It isn't just a transport issue, it's actually a macroeconomic issue. And we see that when cities experience repeated service disruptions, when public-private costs escalate, and sadly, when hard-won development gains are eroded as a result of these events. I'll just give you one example, which my colleague shared with me, is Karachi. It's a city of about 20 million people with, at this point, quite inadequate drainage and land use planning. There were big floods, as many of you know, in Pakistan in 2022. Those floods basically pushed 8.5 to 9 million people into poverty. Not just in Karachi, 20 million, but sort of nationwide. 8.5 to 9 million people went into poverty just because, the drainage systems, et cetera, weren't able to protect them from the events. So had they been sized, had they been maintained properly, there would have been fewer people that would have fallen into poverty as a result of that. Maybe a last point is when we think of urbanization, we always, our eyes are always drawn to the mega cities, the big conglomerations worldwide. But in reality, sometimes the secondary cities are the ones growing fastest, and sometimes they're the first stage when people leave rural areas and move to urban settings. Sometimes they go to secondary cities first, right? So they're the first responders for climate stress and migration pressures. Sometimes they're the critical nodes for transport, logistics, and they tend to be growing rapidly in many regions, but they tend to have even less institutional capacity than some of the biggest cities. And I think that's changed, I know in my region, how we approach work in secondary cities. So we used to think of work on transport corridors. Some people have started to call them economic corridors. We actually think of them as basins of integration. So you've gone from thinking of a corridor that connects maybe a coastal city like Lomé to an inland city like Niamey, and started thinking of it as a basin of integration. So how can you get stuff not just from the endpoints of the corridor, but basically use the corridor to stimulate economic development to the left and right of the corridor, and in the nodes, in those second cities that sort of dot the corridor, basically pull them into the production function, logistics function, et cetera, and create jobs there. So that's basically what's behind the basins of integration concept that I think you'll see in many regions now. So with that, let's go right to today's discussion. So we're going to look at not whether resilience matters, but how we move from pilots to scale in dealing with these resilience issues. So we'll look at how cities can finance resilience upfront, rather than basically just going and reconstructing after every disaster, how urban infrastructure can be managed as systems and not isolated assets, and how secondary cities can access the tools, the data, the partnerships they need to keep pace with growth and climate change. So I'm going to invite all of our panelists to focus on very practical things, practical lessons, replicable models, what's actually worked on the ground. Let me maybe also just give you a quick sense of who we are. One second. So with me on the panel today, I'll start at the far end. We've got Ben Welly, who's the Director of Integrated Transport and Innovation at the WRI Ross Center for Sustainable Cities. Welcome, Ben, to the panel. We also have Savina Carlucci. I'm reading them in the order in which they're in my brief here, not as this is. Savina is the Executive Director at the International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure. We have with us also Nicolas Miravalls, who's the CEO of Oris Materials Intelligence. Welcome, Nicolas. We have Tenzin, the Director General of the Department of Surface Transport of Bhutan. Thank you very much for joining us, PG. And last but not least, I leave the World Bank colleagues for last, of course, Bianca Bianchi Alves, who is our Transport Practice Manager in Latin America and the Caribbean. So welcome to all of you to this panel. And let's see, let's go to our first set of questions. So I'll start with Savina and say, we've talked a little bit about the importance of resilience to set the stage, but just tell us a little bit, what does truly resilient urban transport look like? What do those networks look like from your sort of more macro perspective, and how can they be achieved?
Thank you, Franz. It's good to be here. So let me just start with a bit of a textbook definition. Resilient urban transport network is one that keeps people and goods moving safely and reliably during disruptions, able to withstand shocks and recover quickly and adapt to changing risks over time. Where the change in risk is obviously climate change is very much front of mind, but also our socio-economic and technological disruptions or stresses or changes in demand and so forth that can cause disruption. So, but the resilience urban transport network is not just one that never fails. It's also one that ages gracefully, if you can allow me this, and recovers quickly and learns from disruption. I think that's a very much more poetic definition, I guess, than the textbook one. Resilient urban transport network needs to be inclusive and diverse. So diverse in the sense of having that multimodality where possible. That kind of avoids that single point of failure. If something goes wrong, then you have an alternative. It needs to be inclusive because it needs to serve all users, and also it needs to be very cognizant and of the interdependencies and vulnerabilities that you have in an urban environment. So this is not just transport depends on energy and on comms and so forth, but also when you do something into the urban transport system, such as introducing e-mobility, then you're also introducing a new vulnerability. Now you now dependent on your card working, on other things to be in place to actually be able to use services. It needs to be underpinned by knowledge and institutional systems. So this is the governance, this is the operational protocols, and also the data systems and the technology and all of that. And I think, from my macro perspective, I suppose the technology is very exciting for urban transport systems because it gives us so many more integration possibilities in terms of delivering that type of system that I've just described. So now it's not all cities have got all of these things in place, and not and like it's a little bit of a journey, but that's kind of I've described what resilient transport systems should be. Something that I want to say that is having listened to conversations, and you took one of my talking points around wiping, something happens, then you wipe out completely all the investment that is so hard won, when you put that into the transport system. But then let's flip it on its side, on its head. And I heard, a lot of the discussion yesterday was about mobilizing private capital. And what I heard from the private investor is if you can demonstrate that you've embedded and considered resilience, and you're guaranteeing that kind of continuity of service, and that sort of whole life cost, then they're happier to invest. And so it is, I suppose, more appealing for a private sector. So I think that's a point that needs to be made in terms of resilience. And then, maybe one more thing I want to say is we did a survey with infrastructure professionals last year. We surveyed 3,000 infrastructure professionals across 100 countries. Which is doesn't sound maybe much, but it's a big effort when you think about surveys. And these are the people on the ground. They are not the policymakers. It's a very bottom-up view. And asking what the government's top priority should be, or even local government top priority, they said regulation policies, but very strongly came the message from the ground, from people on the ground, say, you really need to think about the invisible resilience measures, which are risk-based maintenance, retrofitting programs. And this is something that is invisible because it's not a ribbon-cutting thing. It doesn't give the politicians the visibility that opening a new hospital or a library, but it is so such a no-brainer when you're trying to achieve a resilient urban transport system to think about, I've got limited resources, what am I going to focus my money on the risk-based maintenance, on a coordinated, I suppose, coordinating with other infrastructure providers within the city. I'll give you an example since you asked me for examples. So I live in London. I lived in London for a number of years. And one of the projects actually we worked for when I was in the private sector was the Greater London Authority. And they basically act as a neutral convener for the city of all the infrastructure providers, and they provide a digital platform for infrastructure providers to provide their data, which they're not always willing to share. But the point is that so those interdependencies and that coordination across infrastructure providers, whether it's transportation, whether you got street works that actually are for the water system, but then impact the traffic. So the coordination of street works, for example, is something simple, but something that then, if done in an integrated way, understanding the dependency and impact on each other network, that adds to the resilience of the whole city, minimizing the disruption. So that's something very practical to maybe end.
So, thank you so much. So let's, what I take away from that is resilient. What makes things resilient is the redundancy, the fact that it's inclusive, that it ages gracefully, infrastructure, and that it fails maybe softly, right? And that let's turn now to Ben and just ask a little bit, why is urban transport resilience more important than ever?
Well, I think I'm not saying it's more important than ever, but I think we know that climate adaptation is more important than ever with regard to the changing and more severe weather events that we're seeing, whether it be a year or two ago in Porto Alegre, Brazil, where you just saw massive floods, and I think a lack of a surprise probably even that this could happen, but a real lack of understanding of how to adapt to it and how to deal with it in terms of things like getting people out of areas, having reliable public transport routes that are not going to be affected by flooding. Just even understanding where those things are lacking. And so and then you see things in Nairobi a year or so ago. I think it was a year ago or 2 years ago, just this month or next month, where Nairobi experienced some extremely horrific flooding. And we've seen that too in Pakistan, and we've seen subways being flooded in New York City. These things are stuff that we see in the news on television, when they happen and how they're impacting transport systems. So I think it's already been communicated to us that it's quite important right now. We have been looking at, particularly how people move in low and middle income countries, and in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, for example, up to 90% of surface transport trips can be called what we call informal transport trips. So mostly in minibus taxis or motorcycle taxis. That number in Latin America can even run up to as much as 50% of all trips still happening in what we call the informal sector. So we released a paper about 9 months ago called Missing Mobilities, and it's all about how adaptation and resilience issues are really becoming more and more important to be addressed with the informal sector in cities. And I'll just make one point about that paper, and then we can go on. But one thing we did was review the climate adaptation plans of 7 cities that are part of the a global research project called PRISM, which is looking at research on informal and shared mobility. That's where the RISM part comes of the PRISM acronym. But we looked at these cities around the world that include Accra, Mumbai, other cities, and we found that while informal transport is mentioned in some of the climate action plans for the cities, that adaptation and resilience is really left out, especially when you look at what role the informal sector is, what actions are needed with regards to the informal sector. That is how most people move, and those are largely absent. So I will just say that I think we've seen it become this very important issue in front of our eyes and our experience, but we're a little bit behind in how we, when I say we as a global community of transport have worked to actually now incorporate adaptation into and resilience measures into projects. And my final point, which I'll maybe get to elaborate more or may not do, given our panel time, but we have all of the mitigation actions that are happening, say, to improve public transport in cities through BRT or to introduce electric vehicle fleets. But we're finding that, for example, if we don't have resilience understood and planned for, that things like charging stations for motorcycles or the vulnerability of those vehicles to flooding is something that really could affect their financial or even operational sustainability. So I think it's something that we do need to really incorporate more into how the planning and operations of transport is working in cities. And I think there's some progress happening to that end, but there's much more to be desired, I think. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think Ben and Sabina have given us sort of a shared conceptual understanding of resilience. Let's take it down a notch to 2 specific regions and see how that plan plays out. So I'll start with Bianca. We worked with in Latin America for many years. So let me know, Bianca, what would you say are some of the good lessons, actually good lessons and not so good lessons of countries or cities in Latin America that have incorporated resilience into urban mobility designs, or some salutary examples of where they failed to integrate it and have had to live with the consequences?
Thanks, Franz, very much. And just a reminder that Latin America is 82% urbanized. And so, our work is very much in the cities. All the GDP has been generated in the cities, the jobs are in the cities. And so they're really important. We can't overlook, their functioning, their productivity, their efficiency, etc. just a little bit of the journey on when we started talking about resilience here in the bank. And I'm an engineer, I'm a civil engineer, and many people from my team are civil engineers or whatever type of engineers. And so resilience for us is such a basic concept, like, no, we already do this, and so sort of there was a little bit of resistance because we thought it's obvious we do this. And then I started investigating a little bit more. And then, okay, yes, we do this, but the hydrological curves are a little updated. Yes, we do. And the hydrological curves, okay, in this case, they're fine, but they're becoming less predictable, or the sort of the buffer factors are not being enough. Okay, this is changing. And so I think that understanding is not there in the engineering community for sure. And so I think that has led us, and we deal with a lot of our ministries of transport, etc. We deal a lot of our Ministry of Works. We deal a lot of people that have the same knowledge that us. No, so I think that there's a significant growth inside this institution, and therefore with the clients on in showing the severity, of this theme and how it should really be taken as a priority. And through sort of the methodologies that the banks jointly developed, etc., which are very painful for our teams to implement, etc., it forced us to have these conversations. And so it really is, the banks at its best. It's messy, it's not linear, etc., but it really, I think, made a change. Responding to your question, I think that it's so easy to sell resilience, in a way, because if you embed resilience in the planning stage, you dramatically reduce long-term costs and service disruptions. There's a cost to that. You can quantify it. Sometimes there is some sensitivity analysis that you have to do, right? But it really is a cost, and definitely operators and city government, they understand that. For instance, the Bogota Metro Line 1 is a construction that is 70% done. It's, hopefully we're going to be inaugurating it soon. Has very advanced resilient measures, flood resistance drainage, seismic resistant structures. We're doing more and more metros, or wanting to do more and more metros in seismic areas, and obviously that has to be taken into consideration. The rail yard platform is 4 meters above ground. It mitigates flooding, that has enormous disruptions. Once you implement a metro system in a city, it's the lifeline of the city. You need to keep it going. So a rail yard that is a bit higher. This is coming from the failed experiences on the BRT, some of the BRT trunk lines in Bogota that were flooding all the time. And so this avoided cost of retrofits. And when it's not that we build a lot of green fields. We're retrofitting the cities, 82% urbanized. There's a lot of retrofitting the entire time. But in any case, when we're building such a big investment, these measures have to be from the planning phase. Belo Horizonte, many of the cities we operate, we are, the main trunk corridors, etc. They are in valleys. They are, in the areas that are easier to build. And then, yes, of course, the natural place to put a BRT, to put a trunk system is on those riverbeds, right? And so they are the backbone, of those cities. So many of those cities where ignore this, are routinely affected. The discontinuity in service. In Lima, we see segments of the Metropolitano BRT that carry 700,000 people a day, and key arterials regularly flood due to insufficient drainage. In San Salvador, it disrupt trunk and feeder bus operations during heavy rainfall. In Montevideo, the coastal Rambla, if you've ever been there, recurrent closures of significant arterial, route in the city. Montevideo has very little public transport, so they depend on, it has daily effects, And Recife, we have situations with hillside roads serving these low-income neighbors are frequently blocked by landslides. This is all happening in the city, and obviously with significant impacts. I think that through our projects, and we are really, when with the support of GFDRR, the grant fund for facility, whatever. Everyone knows what GFDRR is at this point. If you don't, that's risk reduction. Exactly the experience that comes many times from the Europeans, from the Japanese, etc. We are really trying to develop these mobility corridors that will be able to resist, and maintain operations in extreme events. And I think that embedding this from the start is the way to go. No, and it's very clear to our clients. It has a price. It has a price. It has a benefit. You have to see where you want to be. No, and that's the part that is, the devil is in the details there. But it really is. We're trying to bring this concept, these conversations, make them talk amongst each other. Normally there are several agencies. No, so that's our job.
I think that's a great way to close it, because it isn't just, of course, people realize that they have to make the infrastructure resilient, but to what point? Like, what kind of a risk do you reasonably protect against, right? Without doubling the cost of the investment to begin with, right? So let's go to Tenzin and just, Tenzin, give us some examples of how you've embedded resilience considerations into your national planning documents, your strategies, etc., and how, if you can tell already, that's made a difference for Bhutan.
Okay, thank you. I'm Tenzin and I'm from Bhutan. For those of you who do not know, Bhutan is a small kingdom in the Himalayas. We are a very small country, unlike America and many other big countries. We are a small population of about 750,000 people, and we have around maybe 130,000 or so cars. So we are really very, very small in scale. And Bhutan being a developing country, I think we have the advantage of learning from many other bigger countries, especially on our path to economic development. So learning from the other countries, one advantage we have is we have been able to at least develop very good policies and also very supportive policies to implement a resilient infrastructure. To give, we have many good examples of policies and strategies. Just to provide some examples of good policies. For example, we have Bhutan Transport Vision for 2040. Things like over there, what we talk is really electrification of our transport system and giving importance from changing from private vehicle ownership to buses and non-motorized transport. That's one. Similarly, under the UN and under nationally determined contributions, we have developed a low emission development strategy, mainly focusing on many other things, but also on the resilience of the infrastructure. For example, we provide so much focus on electric vehicles through BRTs and LRTs, and then urban resilience and through non-motorized transport. Just to give an example of how we target our resilient transport system is we have under the low emission development strategy. By 2047, we are thinking that we will reduce carbon emission from transport by 43%. And similarly, another target we have for by 2035, we plan to have all our taxis and the government vehicles. We have a lot of government vehicles are used for the government system. We want to make sure that 100% of imports will be EV vehicles. And similarly on that, we also have light vehicles. We want to reduce, increase the import of EV light vehicles to 70% by 2035. These are some examples of low emission development, which really helps in developing the resilient transport system. Similarly, our capital city is called Thimphu. We have the national capital town development strategies. Over there, one of the major components of that master plan is the low emission transport master plan. For example, over there, we talk about developing a rapid bus system, electric rapid bus system, running all the way from north and south throughout the city, and also pedestrianization, where the focus will be on non-motorization transports and also like the bicycle lanes, development of footpaths. These are some of the examples of strategies we have. How do we implement these policies? In our country, the implementation, we do it through the 5-year plans. Currently, we are in the 13th 5-year plan. And all of these things we try to embed in our development 5-year plans. For example, we give so much focus on the development of our road network and transport system. About 10 to 15% of the whole government resources are focused, prioritized in this development, development of road network. So these are the few of the policies. I feel that we have very strong and supportive policies which enable us to implement better resilient urban, overall the transport infrastructure, but even the urban transport. Thank you.
Let me just press you a little bit, Tenzin, because you've talked a lot about things that reduce emissions, having more non-motorized transport, more pedestrian ways, moving to electric BRTs, all this stuff. But what about the resilience side? In other words, the adaptation to the climate change of which you're primarily a victim. You're not you don't cause it, but you inherit the consequences. Can you talk a little bit about how you're making those assets, whatever they are, the national roads or the urban transport systems, etc., more resilient against climate shocks? Are there things that you're embedding in your planning now that you probably wouldn't have been doing 10, 15 years ago?
One example I can provide is that because of its importance, during the implementation of a 5-year plans, my department is directly responsible for the implementation of road network. What we have done is we have developed standards and guidelines where our infrastructure development, particularly the urban infrastructure development, we have to follow those guidelines and standards. It's mandatory, but these are few ways where we make sure that the standards for resilience is adopted. That's one. And also we use now more and more the database, a GIS-based data system, where we use a lot of information, not only from our ministry and department, across the country. We have like institutions like Department of Disaster Management. They play the lead role overall in the planning and preparation for disaster. So through their work and in collaboration with our ministry, we try to adopt the technology, the different standards to make sure that our infrastructures are resilient.
That's great. I think we've had a good round of questions thinking about, okay, what resilience is and how it's actually operationalized. But now let's focus a little bit more on how to operationalize it, right? Beginning with planning that basically embeds the resilience straight from the start. And with that, let me go to Nicolas Miravalls, because I know, Nicolas, you run a company, right, that basically focuses on embedding resilience considerations into the planning process. So tell us about some of the tools that can be used by cities to assess risk, to manage assets, and to respond to disruptions when they do happen.
Yes, thank you. Actually, this has been said a bit already, but we will probably focus a little more about the how here. How do we do that? And what is the transition here? So compared to traditional way of planning and designing infrastructure, there are two big transitions at the moment. One is the digital transition, and the other is the environmental transition. And those transitions are the last 10 years probably, but it's accelerating. It's accelerating a lot also with new capacities. AI is all over the place, and AI is really helping also getting to that level of digital transition. So, by the past, and if we look at the millenniums behind, we were planning roads only on mechanical performance. That was the only one parameter, no cost, no resources, nothing, just mechanical performance. And then for centuries, we had the cost as the main driver, only cost. But now, again, last 10, 15, 20 years, and this is accelerating, we have so many more parameters coming in the game. And those parameters are all important. We cannot say, or we cannot work them sequentially. We need just to work them holistically. comprehensively, and that was said as well. So those parameters now are getting to resilience, and finally I'm landing on resilience because this is the last in the room, probably the last years, but so important as well. And resilience is calling a lot of data, really, a lot of climate projections, climate exposures, climate risk, climate, you name it, and those data. This is far beyond traditional engineering, and back to the how. Our traditional road and infrastructure engineering systems have to also reassess their methodologies, their processes, and we need to be a lot more systematic than we on those topics particularly. We need to address those things differently. And we've seen that through the emergence of new methodologies, and that is good. We just need to enforce the point, and I think that was said again. So I'm sorry to repeat a few points, but I think we are well aligned in this panel at least. Those methodologies are to be systematic because this systematic will bring consistency, will bring better results actually, because we cannot reinvent the wheel exactly as we did for mechanical performance. We did the building codes, we did a lot of technical works around that. We now need our building codes regarding resilience. We need methodologies, we need systematic approach to that. We need to really make sure that the steps are covered. Otherwise, we miss some big opportunities that transform into disasters. So those steps are basically known. It's about climate exposures, and we have lots of climate risks that we can map out. We at ORIS, for example, map out 28 climate risks. So just to make sure that we cover all the things. Then after we have the vulnerability assessment, which is now turning to kind of fragility assessment, a little more comprehensive approach to vulnerability, out of which we can really get to adaptation measures. So where and how should we adapt the infrastructure to make sure that the vulnerability are addressed? And this is a critical exercise. And then comes a series of indicators to help the project qualify. So what is the level of adaptation of the project? What is the cost dedicated to adaptation of this project? What is the risk that we accept still on this project? What is the maladaptation potentially that we still accept on the project? So all that must be a little bit quantified and respond to new standards.
So Nicolas, kind of interesting, but it's talked about, how can we use data according to these different risks? You mentioned 28 of them, et cetera, to really make sure that the investments you make are really targeted to the highest areas of vulnerability, right? But let me talk to now turn. Okay, so data is one as a way to plan better and to target spending better to minimize risk. But what about new instruments? I want to talk to turn to Savina for that, just to say, like Bianca, I'm an engineer. I remember when I went to engineering school, the School of Civil Engineering was called Civil Engineering. Now it's Civil Engineering and Environmental Engineering, right? So that change is also reflected in the kinds of interventions we have today that wouldn't have perhaps been thought about 30, 40 years ago. So tell us a little bit about the role of nature-based solutions, for example, that engineers maybe 30 years ago wouldn't have been so comfortable with, right? Or talk us about community-informed design. Engineers usually think that they have the answers. The idea that those can be community-informed doesn't always come naturally, but tell us about those two elements in your experience.
Thank you. I'm feeling good company because there are quite a few engineers on the panel. Yes, so absolutely. I mean, I'm technically traditionally trained civil engineer. When I studied, none of this was part of my curriculum. I must say that even though this is improving, I don't think we are there in terms of a change in the profession where we should be, because engineers, the ones that are practicing, I think, in the hierarchy of solutions that you consider, in terms of alleviating flooding in cities or thinking about designing a bus stop, whether it's like increased safety for women. I don't think this is the first thing that comes to mind to traditionally trained engineers, what I'm going to be talking about. So there is that sort of professional shift that still needs to happen, and both for the change in the curriculum of engineering schools now, and also kind of upskilling the professionals. But turning to this nature-based solutions in cities. So now this is looking at nature in a completely different way and thinking about nature as part of a solution, as part of infrastructure. So we're seeing more of such solution being implemented in cities. So I'm just going to be mentioning the green corridors. I mean, the Medellin one is a very classic. Now I say classic example, and maybe not everyone knows actually about those. It's vegetated, so there's like you can cycle and you can run, and then you can. So those are reducing the temperature, in the extreme heat. That's the benefit of those vegetated, and also have public health benefits for promoting active travel and so forth. So that's an example. Another example that actually probably has been implemented for longer is the sustainable urban drainage. So the use of rain gardens, the permeable pavements, and so forth. I think this is something that engineers have actually implemented for longer. And for me, is also a great example of something that delivers a resilience and adaptation measure, or benefits. But also has some kind of built-in flexibility and adaptability, in the sense of when you think about retrofitting or like maintaining or something like this. We talked about retrofitting a lot. It's easier I suppose, retrofit the urban drainage and dig that up rather than break the road and break the pipe and so forth. So that's, I think, something that needs to be taken into account. Having said that, the survey that I quoted before showed that professionals around the world think that only just 15% of the projects they're involved with actually include this type of nature-based solutions. So that shows that this is actually still, I think, a pilot stage. I agree with Ben, like that the resilience and adaptation is definitely not being as embedded or implemented as much. I mean, nowhere near as much. I feel sometimes when I go into conversation like this, we all kind of preaching to the converted, but outside of this room, there's a whole profession, whole world of people that actually don't really do this on a regular basis. And so maybe then turn it into, maybe a final point on this is that when we think about nature-based solution and including green spaces, in cities, we also think about the equity dimension, just avoiding, gentrifying wealthy neighborhoods, and thinking about actually having that as a more equitable outcome. And then moving to the community-informed design. This is, let me just push it even further. Let's add also a GEDC, gender equality, disability, and social inclusion lens, because local knowledge is always going to help deliver a more contextualized, a more locally relevant solution. And this is not something that engineers at their desks, necessarily have that knowledge, unless they are actually consulting with and repeatedly interfacing with the people who are the users, the ultimate beneficiaries of the transport system. And so maybe on the GEDC, gender equality, disability, and social inclusion, because as I said at the start, a resilient transport network serves everyone. So, and this more vulnerable segment of society are the ones that are actually the most impacted. They really need to be safeguarded a lot more in terms of like the design of the solutions in the cities. And I think, to just move it to maybe the conversation a little bit further, let's think about the nexus, the kind of intersection of infrastructure services, the gender equality, disability, and social inclusion, and then the climate change, because climate change exacerbates existing social vulnerabilities. Let me just give you an example, because you asked for example. So if you think about women that we heard today are reluctant to use public transport because they don't feel safe. So you can implement measures such as better lighting. You can actually, not just women, but also elderly people, people with disability, access, improve access and all of this. I mean, climate change, if there's something there, climate change even exacerbates. If you think about in the summer, extreme heat, something, the design of a bus stop also needs to include something that then thinks about, okay, extreme heat, am I going to be, have a shaded, tree canopy and so forth. So, like the integration of all of this approach is what is going to deliver the best outcomes in terms of delivering the socioeconomic benefits, encouraging people to actually continue accessing jobs and education, especially those more vulnerable segments of society, but also delivering resilience and adaptation benefits.
Great overview, Savina. Let me turn to Tenzin now. Challenges in implementing resilient designs in Bhutan, and maybe just give us a flavor of some of the innovative tools that you're using that might be interesting for others.
Okay, challenges we have plenty. Being a very small country, we have a lot of challenges. Just to inform on the challenges, as I said, we are a very mountainous country, and also because of climate change, our monsoons continue to be very unpredictable. Like just for example, last season, like most of our road networks are completely disrupted. Many of our communities didn't have any access for a few months. So that is the scale, the kind of challenges we are facing. Landslides and floods continue to be our biggest challenge for us. This causes a lot of vulnerability of our road and other service facilities. Similarly, as you mentioned earlier in your opening, even for Bhutan, the rapid urbanization, I think that is proving to be very challenging as well. Most of our people from the rural communities keep on moving to cities like capital city and other smaller cities. While we try our best to plan our cities and then build all the required urban infrastructure, the rate of people coming and the city's growth is much faster. So that exposes our people and community to all sorts of nature's fury. And similarly, Bhutan still being a developing country, all those challenges means we have to have resources to maintain the urban infrastructure. So all these are big challenges. There's no easy solution. As I informed earlier, we are learning from the experiences, all the technologies mentioned by you all. We are trying to implement this. We don't really have a very good success stories, but all these the solutions like nature-based solutions and especially having a lot of data. Like one thing that we are trying to do is the national single window for information, like our land commission, they do that. And we all the institutions come together, we try to have a lot of data, we try to use that to come up with better infrastructure solutions. These are the few things we do, but we are still in a learning phase. We have a lot to learn. These are the things we try to do.
So centralized database for sharing across institutions, right? That's one innovative approach. Let me ask Bianca for some good examples of innovative solutions in Latin America. And then I'm going to open it up to questions because I see a lot of heads sort of nodding off a little bit or people checking their phones. So Bianca, it's something.
Thanks, Franz. No, I was hearing her say about the inequality and, I live in Washington, D.C., and in my neighborhood, they're investing a lot on these green spaces that I think is supposed to, and I'm thinking, really? Do we need this? And perhaps we do, no, but it seems that it's already so green. And so, why are we going to invest more on this? So, I hope that they are investing all over DC. Maybe the World Bank should be there to give them some suggestions. But look, we are in Latin America, in the Caribbean, developing a host of tools. I'm going to focus more on the urban ones. No, that is the objective here, but some sophisticated, some basic stuff with sophisticated data behind. No, we're making sure and that our projects are using updated hydrological and geotechnical modeling, updated drainage and pavement standards, and we work depending on the needs and all the opportunities with each client. Obviously, GIS-based climate risk maps. Cities like Bogota, São Paulo, Belo Horizonte, Santiago are investing in real-time rainfall monitoring, improving, obviously, drainage systems, slope stabilization measures. In São Paulo, for instance, we are financing the Sigma model, which is connected to the BRT project that invests on a control center that is going to support early warning systems that use sensors, artificial intelligence, and real-time data to trigger rapid coordinated responses and operational actions. In Lima, for instance, the expansion of the Metropolitano, the BRT system incorporates climate-informed drainage upgrades and enhanced monitoring along to prevent floods, to prevent service interruptions. We increasingly rely on GPS fleet management tools so that we can integrate, mobility control centers with flooding systems, right? So then we're responding more adequately when an event happens. No, I think that in Belo Horizonte, for instance, we are working this integrated mobility planning with the flood planning, so that when events happen and the drainage systems don't work, etc., we make sure that we put back in business not only the ambulances and the emergency, but also the public transport. Now it transports 80% of the population in the city. You want to make sure that they are the first to get back in. Perhaps the car owners can telecommute. Most of the bus users cannot telecommute. So make sure that that they come back to business earlier, no? And then, for instance, somebody mentioned here the cycling. I think you were referring to Medellin, but also Bogota. No, I mean, having that extremely high quality cycling network has shown to be a measure of resilience. No, when the city has faced a significant flooding, the cycle lanes continue working. It was also resilient during COVID. Nobody, because of the social distancing measures, etc. It was when a significant ramp up in the use of that system. So yeah, I mean, I think those are the examples that I have here with me, Franz.
Excellent. So let's open it up to questions from the audience. I know Lamas is also monitoring people sending questions online. If I remember right, I mean, about 2,000 people come to TT in person and about 20,000 attend virtually. So it's like 10 to 1. So make sure that they get a chance to ask a question. But let's start here. We have Charles. Charles, one question. And then actually, do we have a mic to go around, or otherwise we can actually.
I have a question about resilient infrastructure and the cost. Establishing it is expensive, and maintenance is very important. I think about drainage systems. How, and I think the question for the Director General of Town, I know, developing and emerging countries have many needs. How do you convince the Minister of Finance to allocate enough money? Does it take a catastrophe and then argue, or do you educate? What's your approach?
Rachel, let's take a couple of questions, and then that way you can kind of think about your answer. Please go ahead. Yeah, please, lady in black, go ahead.
I hope I am audible now. I'm not sure. Mine is, I'd like to get an example on how well you work with other stakeholders beyond transport. The reason I'm asking is I feel like other sectors have practiced on adaptation. They know that they need to work with other sectors to get it done. But I feel like in the transport sector or the public sector, so while we work on just looking at infrastructure, you know, security issues, we're looking at gender issues, but generally in that space, it's already not a safe environment for the people to use street lights. Are we just tick the box because of the broader issue here, and are we working with this area safer? So just looking at holistically, participating in the discussion.
I should have said that for the first question. So please just introduce yourself.
Sorry,
Very good. First one, Charles Schlumberger, Senior Aviation or Lead Aviation Specialist. And we had one more question. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Cristina Contreras, and I work at a consulting company called Supernova, mostly Latin America. So my question is related to nature-based solutions, because we have been talking about this for many, many years now, but we are not seeing that mainstream of nature-based solutions in our project. And sure enough, we had good examples here and there, but what do you think are the causes for not having seen those solutions at the scale? And what can we do to remedy that? Thank you.
Great. So we take those three questions for starters. Ben, you want to start? We could start with the last one. Go ahead.
Well, I want to start out with a statistic, which is that I think around 20 to 30% of land in cities is streets, right? So that can vary depending upon the city. More developed cities tend to have more streets because they have more street connectivity and more grids and that kind of thing. But then if you add on in some places of the other public space like parks and natural areas and so forth, this could go up to 40 or 50%. So and all of that for the streets that we're talking about hardscape, right? So this is just a collector of heat. It's a collector of water. And so what I think we need to really emphasize is we're talking about the public realm. We're talking about public space. We're talking about how streets are designed. And I do love the comment about the need for more street trees. And because these are things that offer shade, they offer some resistance to rain, at least to a certain point. They offer additional benefits with pollution and just other connecting to things like quality of life in cities and so forth. But then getting into the other types of nature-based solutions that we really ought to be incorporating into our streets, like bioswales or other types of retention facilities that can hold back water or repel heat and things like this. I mean, those, if the best examples, say in the United States or Europe, you have, you know, Bianca mentioned Washington. Washington's done amazing work because they're trying to prevent all of the sewage overflow from happening because they have a combined sewer, right? That means the sewage, the storm sewage and the raw sewage from people's homes at some point when it's overloaded just gets emptied into the rivers. And the US government said, no, you can't do that. You need to figure out a plan. So they've built this huge big tank underneath the Anacostia River. But that's costing millions and millions of dollars and years of planning. And so part of the solution is accompanying this with nature-based solutions, but those things happen on streets. They can happen in small parks across the city, and that needs to be a real coordinated effort. I think there are success stories to look to, but we really ought to think holistically about incorporating adaptation and resilience thinking into like everything that we're doing. And to your question, I don't think we're there yet on finding something where you can put these facilities in and there's some kind of operations plan for their sustainability, for the facilities themselves and their resilience. Because you can put in trees, like we worked in Ethiopia to do a massive tree planting effort. But part of the problem was you need to have a plan for how that's going to work, because the trees won't survive more than a year or two unless there's a decent plan for how they're going to be maintained. And so these are things we need to look at and we need to learn. And I don't think that those things are in place. There might be an example here and there, but they're not institutionalized. And so that's where we all need to continue working towards getting to that point. I'm not sure the recipe, but we just need to keep moving forward.
Anybody want to take a crack at the other questions? One was about, is transport participating in the wider conversations, not just sort of dealing with, the insecurity around a bus stop, but sort of what about the overall security in that neighborhood or whatever? I think if I got that right. And second, how do you convince, Tenzin, this is definitely made for you, right? How do you convince the finance minister to finance recurrent costs, for example? So
maybe to bounce on this and close the question about nature-based solutions. I fully subscribe to what I just hear, but I think it's also about being systematic in how we approach those things. So I just take the example of still with digital and this augmented capacity compared to traditional engineering. We have today 700 adaptation measures in our data bank. And these 700 measures are matched to the vulnerabilities and the climate risk exposure that we have project by project. So it's really a huge work if we were to do it, in a traditional way. So if we systematize that, if we have something like, okay, every single project we go through this vulnerability, we look at all the adaptation measures that can work, and a good share of those adaptation measures are nature-based solutions, and that's probably the way, one of the ways at least, to get more systematic there and have more nature-based solutions implemented for real.
So you're kind of prompting the engineers, why aren't you thinking of these 20 things, right? Or
absolutely, right? Yeah.
Tenzin, your turn to shine. What do you say to the Minister of Finance?
That's very, very true. Like, this is a challenge we face on a very regular basis. For Bhutan, I think the geography and topography is so dramatic. Like, and for us, we depend on road infrastructure. 90% of our transportation is through road, maybe even more than that. And whenever we get landslides and flooding, the impact is so dramatic. Like, most of the time, we either have the road or there's no accessibility to both the urban centers and even the rural areas. Having said that, I mean, because of that, the pressure is also on the government and the Ministry of Finance to do something about it in a way that helps a ministry like ours to get resources. For the longer term, and I think for a better solution, I think build database. I think that is the most important. We are working on road asset management system, where we have to keep on collecting information and the impact and the consequences if you do not do anything on that. And I was also told that recently there was a study where the cost of the damages are huge, but if you do not do anything, the economic losses is maybe 7 times. So these are the, I mean, to argue on that and to work with the Ministry of Finance, I think that's where we have to do. We have to build database and we have to make an economic case on getting the resources for that. We are trying to do that, but we still continue facing challenge on that. Thank you.
So I'm going to come back for a second round of questions, but let me see, Lama, is there anybody online? Yeah, just grab one from the table.
There's a question that Savina already touched on, but I'll throw it out there anyways, is as our global cities face rapid urbanization and climate risks, how do we make sure through strategies that resilience is not going to the wealthy and the more vulnerable are benefiting from it?
Yeah, we'll take one more question then from the room.
Hi, I'm Hanan Kariyaka with the Global Design Cities Initiative, GDCI. And we, maybe everyone here in this room, work with cities that are already built, especially in the Global South. So my question is, are there any leading cities that are dealing with this at scale? Because we often see specific projects and corridors, but cities often have like thousands of kilometers of streets and infrastructure built. So it's on leading cities that we can help other cities look up to.
Great. Let's maybe take one more question. Yeah. And again, thanks to everyone for introducing themselves.
Muniza Alam with the World Bank. I have a question for Mr. Tenzin, who comes from my favorite place on earth, if I can say. So look, Thimphu is a very interesting place where it's in a valley, but it's still very hilly. It's very cold. There's a lot of snow. So if you could speak to a little bit about how the city has redesigned their public transport system in terms of bus depot design to keep people safe during snow, during wind, during cold rain, how the network is designed. It's an elongated city. So I know there's like a major bus artery and there may be some connections. So if you could speak to the design of public transportation in Thimphu in response to the climate resilience issues that the city faces, that would be very welcome.
Great. So we'll come to Tenzin in just a second. So let me start with Bianca. And so again, the three questions. One is, how do you make sure that the resilience isn't just for the rich, or the nature-based solutions for the rich? Another one, any cities that are good at doing this at scale, not just a little corridor here and there or localized impacts, and then to your favorite place on the planet. But start with.
I think I'm a little bit behind. I'm still on the last question, but we do have a very interesting project in Peru, which is looking at 6 different cities, and a lot of what and it's a transport project, but a lot of what we're doing is improving drainage and in these main cities. So it's the first time that we can do this in 6 cities, medium size, etc. So we're very excited with the possibility. This is under preparation still. Just coming back to some of what has been said before. I mean, the truth is that some of these conversations haven't even started, and many people said that when we are approached by a new government, they look at us as if we're talking something very weird. I mean, when gender is the same, like what do I have to do with this, and so really is an uphill, but it still is. I think it's much better now. I mean, everyone at this point knows that if you're talking to the World Bank, they're going to talk about gender. So I think it's much better now. And I think that the solutions, as you said, they are much more comprehensive. Where our roles, or obligations and come, and where do they stop? That's why we try to come with sort of multidisciplinary groups, and recognizing that they're not going to resolve all the issues of sexual harassment in a city, because this goes much beyond, but at least your systems have to be foolproof for this. And so I think those discussions are very much on the day-to-day of with the clients. No, what do I have to do with this? No, I can't. And sometimes they're right. Sometimes, okay, we need to involve, at least you have to make sure that they are informing this to the appropriate bodies, right? And so in resilience is very multi-sectoral. Sometimes you have an agency that talks about that. They are very good, but they don't communicate. So it's making sure that they communicate and putting together those forums, right? And then on the sort of the extra investment that you have to do, I think that the goal is to talk about life cycle costs, right? And if we talk about life cycle costs, and we have a very strong program in Latin America about resilient CREMA type of contracts, but performance-based contracts that now are sort of 2.0 that incorporate both road safety much more strongly and resilience. And the secret is, let's talk about life cycle approach. In the end, it's going to be cheaper for you. So I think that's very difficult, because it's the difference between doing 2 roads because I have the money now, or doing 1 road that is a good one. So yeah.
Maybe yeah, just on the life cycle. I think what we really face with, I think, is a tension on the different outcomes that you're trying to achieve, right? The resilience itself is very multidimensional, as we talked about today in the panel. But I think it's about, if you are using that life cycle framework, then from the outset, even before the project is conceived, you're actually thinking, okay, what can I do to achieve resilience? What can I do to achieve JEDSI outcomes? What can I do to achieve decarbonization, and all of the other things that we need to be doing everything everywhere all at once, which is not possible. So it's just recognizing the trade-offs and just not sweep them under the carpet. It's just, be honest and say, okay, it's going to be trade-off. I'm going to just be putting nature-based solution in a country, in a neighborhood that is wealthy. And therefore, and there's this benefit somewhere else in the system because, in an urban system, everything is connected. So I think is when you take that life cycle approach and you say everyone has got a role at each stage and what it is that I can do to achieve, the best outcome considering the trade-offs. I think, that's how you actually develop the best, that I suppose infrastructure. For the, I think, and here's where the data and systematic approaches is important, because if you got data, then you're able to make evidence-based decisions. So if you look at disaggregated data for sex, age, disability, and that, and you have that data, then you're able to actually make that systemic decision on whether what you need to be doing in the neighborhood and so forth. And then finally, there's the capacity problem, which is, each one of us, I'm an engineer, there's the policymakers, there's investor, everyone has got a role, everyone has got something that they can do, but do they have the capacity and the knowledge to be doing this, making this kind of decision? This is the problem that Christina raised. I think it's a capacity problem.
Does anybody want to take a stab at the question on a city that's doing this well at scale? So not just a little project here where they manage to integrate all the, so anybody want to take a stab at that? Just a model city that's sort of good at doing this, not just one-off for one project, but mostly. Nicola, you want to jump in?
Maybe a quick contribution here. So thank you for your words. This is so clear to me. We can probably not say when things will happen, but now with data, digital mapping, etc., we can definitely say where. And that's already a progress because budgets are limited and we need to target those budgets to the right places. So where is already an answer. It's already a beginning of resilience to adapt at the right location for the right risks. So this is the beginning of at scale, because at scale doesn't mean we should do everything everywhere. We should be very specific about what we do and where. And then back to the indicators, as you said, Savina, indicators will also address socioeconomic indicators regarding populations that will be isolated or that will be affected, and then we can also decide according to those very granular data systems.
Any city? Ben, do you want to say something about who does well at scale?
Yeah, I don't know the actual, because it's this is such a wide area. You have heat, you have flooding, you have lots of issues that come into the broader definition of resilience. So I think you could look to say, we'll probably hear from Bhutan about some of the issues that are being addressed there. But on heat, for example, you have, Singapore, for example, has work on, shaded areas for pedestrians and things like this. You have cities like Washington here, or Philadelphia in the United States is well known for how the water department there worked, to reduce stormwater or increase stormwater retention through natural solutions. But I think, some of these coastal cities in the U.S. that have a lot of rain, like Portland and Seattle, have some really good things going on, and a lot of people who really do know what they're doing in terms of water issues. But I do think that there's a ways to go. It's not, I think there's been a lot of effort to establish resilience or adaptation plans. And there's been these recent initiatives like the Rockefeller, 100 resilient cities, and more recently, some cities having like chief heat officers, like Athens, Greece is the first city in the world, I think, to have a chief heat officer that's working on a plan to address heat in the city. So those are examples of things that we could probably see more of. But I don't think, in my view, that there's quite a case where we can really look to something that's happening at scale. I could be wrong, but I just don't see it on that level. So.
Great. And now we're going to Tenzin. So the question from the ambassador of Bhutan to Washington, D.C.
On your question, I cannot say that we are successful. But as I said right in the beginning, we are a small country, and I think that helps us be more agile in planning. Like for instance, Thimphu, this is the third round of the third version of the Thimphu structural plan. That is the capital area. And as I mentioned earlier, under that, one of the most important component is the low emission transport master plan. And under that, we are already working with the bank, with other GCF. One of the important things we want to do is the EV BRT from all the way from north to south of Thimphu. It just is not bust BRT. What we are planning to do is to retrofit or redesign the whole road network, covering the whole length of Thimphu from the south to the north. Over there, the plan is to have structures like the cycling lanes and then sidewalks and all those things. This would really help in being more resilient. But as I said, we are just in the beginning of that, and maybe we would be able to do that. And the other example is ride sharing, like at the nodal places where people can park their cars, and from there to move to the city centers, they can share. I mean, these are the plans, but whether it's successful, yeah, we are still right in the beginning phase of this project, this intervention we are doing.
Good. Let's see, is there energy for another round of questions? Otherwise, I'll just go for one more question. Yeah, you've asked one. Hold on, Charles. So I'll take you last. Hold on. There's some. Yes, please go ahead. Introduce yourself, and then hold on. The mic's on its way. And then I'll see the other question. Yes.
Thank you so much. My name is Kazuyuki Neki, working for World Bank. I learned from this interesting conversation, as Bianca already mentioned briefly, the coordination is very important factor. So like for example, road safety, so the resilience needed to many coordination, like design standard, enforcement, or maybe daily maintenance and water resources sometimes. So from your perspective or experiences, what kind of tool or knowledge or finance option will be useful to enhance those kind of coordinations?
And let's send the mic over there. We'll take one more question after that if you've got one in the room. Otherwise, we'll listen to Charles's joke. But question. Yeah. Okay, please go ahead. Introduce yourself.
Okay, hi. My name is Johnny Hayes. I lead on transfer policy at the FCDA, so the Foreign Ministry of the UK government. I know we've already asked a few questions about nature-based solutions, but I'd also like to ask one as well. So I've done a review to our embassies and high commissions on sort of the challenges that they face in implementing nature-based solutions with their partner governments. And one thing that they notice is the fact that that while climate resilience is quite hard to sort of quantify the benefits, nature-based solutions is even harder. So I just want to know what sort of solutions people are coming somewhere. Thanks.
Any last questions? Otherwise, we'll have to go to Charles. Please go ahead.
Sorry, it might have been a really good joke, but I started. Paul Tito from WSB. Paul Tito from WSB. I was wondering about the more about like the life cycle of these like basically, so when there's like a new issue like resilience or equity, for example, there's a tendency sometimes to operationalize quickly, and there's some good that comes out of that. But I was wondering about like the next iterations and how do you actually keep the momentum for the next iteration, because there's like how the firsts might be like we've done the F curves basically, and how to, for if it's we're talking about water, but how do we actually get to how do you actually keep the momentum basically in an organization to get to the second and third iteration after you've done the first change and get to the next step basically?
Okay, great. I'm going to give it to Charles just because he's fourth question. Go ahead.
A very quick question. I'm from Switzerland, and I have a climate change related question because the increase of temperature has destroyed the whole village in Switzerland last year because the permafrost is melting. And Switzerland is investing billions in the mountains to avoid that. Do you experience the same, just temperature increase and permafrost, or the effects of climate change?
So Tenzin, that's coming your way soon, but that'll be last, right? But let's hear about the other questions. So we had one, I think, was incentives, I think, for also for good governance. Then how do you make the, I think the FCO question involved, like, all right, how do you make the case for nature-based solutions, right? You say it's hard to make the case for resilience, even harder to make it for nature-based solution. I'm not sure why that would be the case, but let's see if there's somebody who wants to take a stab at that on our panel. Any brave volunteers for any of the questions? Savina, you want to?
I'll attempt to answer a couple. Maybe on the nature-based solutions, you're right, because especially if you're relying on ecosystem services, they don't materialize immediately. I mean, that's something that you need to kind of bear in mind when you design that kind of solution in. It's and there are nature-based solutions like the ones around drainage and stormwater management that actually can actually be quantified and calculated in terms of the water attenuation and then drainage and so forth. So I think there are nature-based solutions that, and also like use of trees, you can actually quantify, and you can actually quantify how much is the temperature, the delta of temperature with or without trees. So there are things that are within the urban environment that are more easily quantified. If you're thinking about mangroves for coastal protection, then you need to wait for the mangroves to actually start delivering the ecosystem service, which is attenuation, or waves need to be established and so forth, and that doesn't happen on day one. On the governance, I think Bianca said it before. I know it sounds there are digital tools and the visualization of interdependencies in infrastructure networks that kind of show people in a room from different infrastructure providers. They, through visualization, you can see where the pinpoints are, and you can have that conversation, right? But for me, in terms of governance, there's nothing like a good conversation with the right people in the room to actually get them thinking how they can be working together. So I'll give you an example. I was in Chile maybe about a year ago, and we were talking about infrastructure resilience, and we did a workshop with all the different ministries, and it was a UNDRR funded project. So after that project, and so there was a bit of a baseline review of infrastructure resilience for the country. And after that project, then that working group of cross-sectoral discussion of different ministry continued, and they periodically meet to actually discuss. They're convened by the disaster risk management department, say. But that continues, and that's the way to institutionalize that governance for resilience. So I know it's not very high-tech solution, but low-tech sometimes is best.
Anybody else want to come in, or otherwise I'll go to
complementing on that. I mean, we do invest a lot in these integrated control centers and things like that, right? But what we see very often is a lot of investment and people sitting side by side, and it could be anywhere because they're really not talking, they're not developing the protocols jointly. So there's no, I don't know, perhaps AI will save us all, but there's no shortcut in my opinion to have to put them together. And they create these agencies, but the agencies need to talk to the other agencies, and so I think that our role as the World Bank is really, I mean, we really come and say, have you ever talked to this person, and don't you know that it's going to affect your operations, and so it really is very important.
Great. And Tenzin, from Bhutan to Switzerland, permafrost?
Per se, we do not have any problems of permafrost, but we have roads at as high as 4,000 meters above sea level at a few places. Because of that, we've had a different set of problems, like the pavement problems. The maintenance of that is a big issue, and as it is being a resource-starved country, we find it very difficult to get permanent solution to that. But because of climate change, we get a different sort of problem. What we have observed is because of the intensity of rainfall and also because of the irregularity of rainfall, it's not just regular floods, but sometimes we get these flash floods or cloud burst. Then because of that, it reached to debris flows where it washed away whole sections of the road network. And it's very difficult for us to find solutions to that, but this is becoming more regular. Like the flash floods is not so much the problem is caused by water, but by the debris. So this is becoming more a problem in our country. But per se, with permafrost, we have not experienced a disaster of large scale.
Great. I see the referee flashing the 5-minute signal. Now it's become a 2-minute signal. So I'm just going to give everybody just like 10 seconds. I'm just going to go now, beginning with Ben. We'll come down to Bianca. Just leave everybody with like a brilliant idea or something like this. I'm putting Ben.
I'm going to with a
just knock it out of the ballpark. Ben, tell
totally unoriginal idea, but don't plan your city around cars. Cars are the biggest contributor to heat, to flooding. Car-based systems are going to do that. So plan away from cars. That's my message.
Very good. Your brilliant idea.
I want to hand, because a good debate is a bit of contradiction as well. And I felt that it was a bit an attack on the digital here because of the dialogue and everything. So I have to say, I fully agree. So dialogue is crucial. I mean, even with the best tool, we cannot do anything in this field without dialogue and good debate. So yeah, another time for contradiction then.
For me, I think Bhutan being small, in a way, I agree with the first speaker here. We are not really planning so much on having more vehicles, but making it more public transport. And also for Bhutan, since we produce a lot of hydropower, we are going so much on EV vehicles, and that's the future we see for us.
Savina, brilliant thought.
I think we need resilience needs a mandate. It needs a budget line. It needs metrics, and it needs to be on all departments' strategic priorities. That's how we do it, I think.
Now you're going to top them all.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. No, I think that it's not a brilliant idea, but it's just, this is a small group, but I have been seeing how the work that we've been bringing, the conversations that we've been bringing to the clients are changing the way that they're thinking about resilience. So just a shout out to continue doing this. No, we need more of this, and keep your head focused on that very important subject. That's it.
Big round of applause, please, for our panel. Thank you. Thank you. Enjoy your evening.